Good morning, everyone. I'm super excited about today's webinar because I am joined by two of my favorite people. David, I'm going to pronounce your last name Reichbach. Is that correct? I got it finally.
You got
Yes.
it.
So David is my favorite lawyer and market researcher and is the vice president of development for Future Partners. And then we've got our friend Anna over here, who is my other favorite market researcher and board member for TTRA, the Travel and Tourism Research Association, where she loves to volunteer people what they're going to be talking about at their annual conference and what research topics are interesting. And so today we really just wanted to get together to kind of explain a little bit for everyone, what does data mean? What does big data mean? And what is research? And why you need to kind of be thinking about all of these things and understanding them in the context together to make decisions. So here's our agenda for the day. We're going to just first talk about big data and research. We're going to talk about when to use it and what you're using to answer what question. And then David and Anna are going to help explain a little bit how they've put this to use in real life in some case studies for some of the clients. And then we're going to save a little time for Q&A at the end. So if you don't mind putting your questions in the chat box, we'll get to those at the end after we get through this. And with that, we're going to get going. So just to start really quickly on reminding ourselves, what is data versus what is big data versus what is research? Data is data that you own, or that if you are a business and you have a point of sale, right? So if you're an attraction and you have ticket sales, you know exactly how many people went through the turnstile every day, right? Same thing if you're a restaurant, you're collecting receipts at the end of the day to say, hey, here's how much we did for the day, right? And then we've got tax collection, which is also a very finite point of data. It's a complete data set saying exactly how many things we collected on and can report on. Big data is a little different. Big data is like a fire hose of all different types of information that you can pick up a sample. You're never going to get the complete picture of every single data point of collection, but you're getting a huge amount of data that can be statistically significant enough to project upon or model out, right? So a good example of that is lodging data. In your destination, it would be very unusual for every single lodging partner to report in. But if enough of them do, this can kind of give you a good point of view on what occupancy looks like, on what ADR looks like for the destination. Geolocation is very similar. On a big macro level, think about the number of devices that are coming through your destination on a daily basis, right? There usually would be enough people using their phones in app to be able to say, here is a statistically significant amount of users to make some sort of modeled predictions. The smaller you get, the less likely that is. Credit card spending is another example. You're never going to get every single swipe from every single person in your destination, but you can collect a significant sample to then learn some things about what that visitor looks like in terms of spending. And then we got research, and that's where these two cool people come into play, because both of the companies that they work for are experts in the area of research. And this is really where we start to look at qualitative types of data and using multiple sources of data and inputs to come to make an informed decision. And so I'm really excited for these two to kind of take the wheels from here, because this is their area of expertise. We're going to kind of ask each other questions and make comments as we go. So it's not going to be a full deck, but there will be slides to look at as we're talking. And with that, oh, sorry, one more. I like this one because it's kind of like, in my mind, explains a little bit of context of what we do at DataFi, right? So if you, back to my fire hose example, right? Think about how many people are on their phone. Think about how many people are swiping over and over again, right? So big data doesn't mean here's your answer. It means look at all of this information and what can we learn from it, right? And I think this is just interesting to know that real time, every 2 days, there is enough, as much data being generated by people than was from the beginning of time to the year 2000. So if you can really just think about the immense amount of big data that we have, and that needs to be sort of cleaned and thought through to really be able to provide analytics, this is sort of where DataFi lives. So with that, I'm going to go to TTRA board member, research extraordinaire, Anna. How do I know what data to use when? I think that's a big question that every DMO asks, because, you know, knowing that some people have a ton of data, some have a limited set. What do you think is sort of the right way to look at this?
Well, before we're thinking about all these questions, what data do I use? The first question you need to know is, who am I? What are my goals? What is my strategy? What are the advocacy points that I need to support my organization and my community? So the first thing I would say before you even pick what questions to ask is to take a really hard, solid look at your strategic plan. All of that is what should be informing you. There are things that are nice to know and interesting to know. That is not what you should be pulling research data or big data about. You should be looking at your strategic plan. Where are my holes? What do I need to know? How can I advance along with the strategic plan? What can we do for our organization to advance that? And that's what I need to know. Traditionally, as David knows, there's a lot of people through the years who just are like, every year, I buy this product, I buy this product, and I buy this product. And then they go in afterwards and they're like, well, I need to answer these questions. But they weren't buying those products based on answering those questions. They were buying those products based on what it is. And I like to dissuade people of this. It's not just where you are geographically in the United States or the world. There are a lot of DMOs that are right next to each other in the same metroplex that have completely different KPIs, needs, necessities, product evens, and just the realities of operating and attracting visitors and money into those communities. So the first thing you really need to do is know yourself, know strategically where you need to be, and get a good idea of what information you need in order to be truly a data-driven organization. Because we say a data-driven organization, but we need to drive on the right road, right? We need to get our car to the data-driven depot that's the correct one that's going to answer these questions. So that's when we get to these. And these are just some sample questions that have come up a lot of times. I know David and I have talked about this. It's come up with him and with I, and these are very common ones to look at. And a lot of times people will be like, oh, I don't really like that source. It didn't help me get that. And it's like, that's not what that source of information is. And even to, again, Dave and I have been in here for over a decade here for the destination space. The stuff we do, which is more traditional market research, the way people use surveys, David, wouldn't you say, and feel free to chime in here, is so different than it was 10 years ago.
Absolutely. And it's continuing to change.
Yes. So even the same tool is being used in a different way, and it's being used in a way that combines it with big data and data, right? So it is interesting, and in that point where it's like not one data source should be your answer. If there was one data source that was the answer, all of us would just work at that one data source. And it's good to work with vendors who can be honest about that. Be like, hey, survey research and stuff. And again, a lot of these are like structured data, structured being a column and a line, right? They're structured data, but a lot of stuff is qualitative, asking people what they think, because all these metrics, we're measuring people, you know? So again, with some examples here that we have for this spreadsheet, it's like when we're talking about, am I effectively reaching my target markets? There's a lot of different data that can help you with those decisions, right? You can do the survey data with both demographics and psychographics. For those of you who wonder, a demographic is captured by the census, and that's what we're using to match the population. A psychographic is everything else, including satisfaction of trip and, like, you know, what you feel and what your motivations were and what you most valued from the trip. That would be a psychographic. We're also looking here at geolocation data and also that qualitative function, non-structured data, which is absolutely valuable, the intercept or the focus group data. Looking at the middle one, what new market should I target? There are a lot of ways of doing that. You know what I mean? You can use survey data as well as geolocation data and focus group data. What markets am I doing really good in, right, David? And I find the ones that look most like that, right? So I'm looking for lookalike ones, just like when we target people. Here's people who visit our destination who looks like that, but I haven't proven for sure that they've gone to my destination. I want a market to look like people, but also look alike markets. So you can see from these questions here, just some sample ones, every single question here, these are 5 really profound and useful questions to most destinations. Every one of them involves multiple data types. So again, that's why you have people like Lauren, you and me and David, where we work with our partners and we're like, hey, this is how I have the data I have. This is the data you have. How are we going to work together to have the best answer for our client? Because with I love that graph that you had. I love that chart where it's like how much things have gone through time. it's so hard for destinations to keep track of that. It's hard for us to keep track of this, right? Like it's hard for us, but we talk to clients and we talk to our fellow vendors, and we're the ones who like really do have that. And that's why it's so important to have an honest and open relationship with your vendors where it's comfortable, where it's like, hey, I'm not really the best choice for this. I think maybe you should use geolocation data. Like, I think that's a better choice for it. I think it's the responsible way. And I think together we can answer these questions in a meaningful way that can help these destinations with what their strategic goals and advocacy points need to be.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I think a lot of times we're a data vendor, right? And we can do all these things. We can do this for you. We can do that for you, right? Um, Talk a little bit more about the DMO's role in data and sort of aligning aligning the data to some of these macro questions versus getting kind of hung up on the individual business, because I think that that's something that happens a lot, and it's really just sort of taking a reframing of what is my role of research at the DMO level.
Sure, I'll take this first. Then again, David, please feel free to chime in. The thing about it is that at a destination level, what your goal is to break out of the focus group of one, where it's like, I'm sitting on this board and that I have a great idea and this is what it's going to be, when you're not even the target traveler and if any of the segments that this destination is targeting. What you're trying to do is use data, big data, and research in a way that's going to have you fundamentally understand how to best target travelers and to benefit your communities with the spend that's going to be taken in from outside the community to inside. So that is like on a micro level. And again, you don't need to look across multiple data sources to verify something you already have verified. If you already know how many people went to the event, use the information from the event sponsor, right? There are other things that we can do. And I will say, and again, David and I are religious about this, sometimes when we have certain platforms and it can get a little bit much where it's like, I can just keep cutting. Always keep inside, for all these things that are structured, the sample size. When you're doing segments and you're doing splices and you're doing segments, it gets to a point where that segment size is not reliable on there. And so that's just knowing what that. So a lot of things like, like when it comes to, visitation research data, it's better looking at it at a larger kind of edge. There is information we can get from intercepts that, like, what you're going to talk about Louisville, about the Kentucky Derby and things like that, we can actually have more specialized information. But the whole idea is that we want to be able to use data research and big data in a way that's most reliable, that on the scale that's most appropriate and predictable, in order to answer these strategic questions for a destination. And also, to your point, advocacy, because destination management organizations have to prove why they should exist, and they absolutely should. Data helps do that, tell that story as well.
I want to jump in and, just for the audience that might not be in it day to day the way we are, just kind of repeat a couple of the things you said, Anna, because you said them very quickly, that I really want to make sure they walk away with, because it's so important.
Yeah.
Number one is all of the different data sources that we're talking about, and why we, the three of us on here, Lauren, myself, and Anna, are also passionate about using different data sources to help tell a more comprehensive story, is because, number one, these are data to help us learn about humans, human behavior. Humans are not computer programs. Humans are not always predictable. Humans do not always act the same way every time. And having every quantitative data point around something is not necessarily the whole story, because no set of data points fully paints the picture of a human. And we have to accept that, like, every data source has limitations. Every data source has questions it's really good at answering, and it has questions it's really not great at answering, which is the takeaway of this entire slide. That there are questions that we need the combination of different data sources to help tell better. To answer Lauren's question about, like, the main purpose of a DMO, one of the first things Anna said was, even DMOs that share the same metroplex sometimes have different KPIs. That's not randomly selected. That's due to the fact that their stakeholders, the specific, city councils or hotel partners that they are beholden to, that their budget strings are held by, those stakeholders may have different needs. And what's important to us is what's important to our clients. What's important to our clients is what's important to their stakeholders. We can help them come up with lots of new and innovative KPIs to help answer the old questions in new ways. But at the end of the day, they are beholden to answer certain things, and no one as far as I know, and I've been in this industry now for 12 years, no one does it the same way, not a single one.
And that's why, again, when we're talking about when it like from the plane, everything looks the same. That's why the three of us on this call, this is the reason why we all get along so well, is that we're looking at the granular, we're building from the ground up with what, again, we're experts on research and in data. We are not experts on the destination. That's why we really partner everyone on this call here. We're partnering with the destinations, to David's point, to find out what they need on a granular level. And we build the goals and the strategic data and the plans out from there. And that's why it's so important to have vendors who are working together with their DMO partners to help them assist with the organization.
Exactly. And I wanted to come back with one comment on Lauren's first slide on data, big data, and research, because I think even in the TTRA world, we use the word data to mean a lot of different things in different contexts. So, for all of you out there who are like, well, that's not what data means to me, that's fine. For our purposes today, this is what we're defining as data. Data meaning the things that are a complete set. The number of visitors that went to a specific event because they take tickets. That's a real number that we know.
Yes.
And so it's like a real life goalpost. It helps ground a lot of what we're seeing and what I consider trends of big data. I think trends is one of the more reliable things you get from a big data source. Whereas what is on this slide labeled research is both qualitative and quantitative in a lot of different ways, but it's really trying to add the color to the otherwise black and white image that disparate data sources can tell. I think you don't have a complete story of human behavior unless you are combining and integrating all three of these in different contexts.
And the way I would say it, if we just stay here for one more second, Lauren, go back to that one. What you can't find out from big data or data, that's when you call in David and I. So here's the thing. Those ticket receipts are already collected. Those data lakes are already built. I can go back in time and I can grab information. I can reprocess the geolocation and credit card data because that's permanently in those respective data lakes. And I can put on what filters or geographic parameters or whatever I want to do with that big data. When the answers you don't have are data, big data, you should not be using any quantitative or qualitative research to recreate what you can get in big data or data here. You need to be like, this is what are still withstanding, the motivations, the satisfactions, the thoughts behind it, the logic behind it, what's going on with the thoughts and things that I can't capture that. Research should be the thing that's closing the gap for you, but you need to have big data and data in order to best use qualitative and quantitative research.
I'd almost argue to take it a level back that if you already have data and you have the answer through data, you don't need big data. Big data should be used to answer some of the things you don't have with data. If you already have ticket sales, right? Big data shouldn't be used to try to compare to ticket sales because it's just not what it's designed to do, right? Ticket
As
sales.
always, I love David because he said it right. You sold what tickets you sold.
Yeah.
The data lakes are overall macro trends because not every single ping ever in the history of the world is going to be in that data lake in any source. So I really like how David explained that.
On this slide, I just wanted to add that I would add that credit card can help with target markets and what new markets, in the sense of if that data is cleaned very well and bias is removed, meaning we're taking out that you got a corporate headquarters for Amazon in your backyard out of the credit card spending data, right? And we're really looking at it and it's processed in the right way. It can be really useful in terms of looking at, well, who's spending more on average in lodging? Which markets do we see in lodging versus which markets do we just see showing up spending in gas stations, things like that. So anyone that wants to talk more about that afterwards, we can. I want to move on. David, I'm going to put this over to you. So what is your process for determining which data you should make to use decision? Because I think this is one of the most important takeaways for this call.
I mean, I love that you think this is one of the most important takeaways. This is one of the both hardest and most simple questions that we have to answer every day. And it is both hard because it is complex, and it is simple because at its base level, it's kind of obvious. You use the data that can be relevant to helping you make a decision, right? And Sometimes it's one data source, as we just talked about. If the decision you need to make is based on the number of tickets that were sold for a particular event, all you need is the data on the number of tickets that were sold for the particular event. If your question is about how much visitors who went to that event spent in the greater destination, the number of ticket sales is important, but it's not the only data point you need. You need a couple other data points. In the work that I do, usually we pair that with a survey.
Yeah.
We can, I'm sure you're going to talk about some examples on how Datafy has some data points to answer that question as well. But like, just having one data source, I don't know, is always the best answer unless the question you need to answer is obvious, right? There is not always data for every specific question. And sometimes I think the correct answer to this question is, what are the combination of data points that make the best sense, that are the most efficient to use together, that tell the best, most comprehensive story? Because at the end of the day, we are not about finding solutions in search of a problem. We are about finding problems and then designing the right, usually custom solution to get there.
Yeah.
Whether it's, different data points, different big data sets, different surveys that we put together and design it around answering the specific question.
I think with geolocation particularly, the expectation is that it can be a people counter. And I think that that is a tough expectation, because if your sample is large enough, and we think about realistically the amount of people that were in a given point of interest or area on their phone actively using an app, and we've got thousands of people, typically you're going to pick up a pretty decent sample, right? But that sample is never going to account for everyone that was there, just based on the fact that we're just collecting what we can collect. Talk a little bit. Can you guys just talk a little bit? I mean, David, I know you've got a lot of experience in this in the past, having worked with geolocation. Can you talk a little bit about when it makes sense and when it doesn't?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have a lot of personal experience working not just with Datafy, but with other location data vendors. I am very open and transparent about, from my experience, what location data has been really good at answering and when it hasn't. And one of the reasons why, I just want to put this out there, one of the reasons why Future Partners loves partnering with Datafy is because they are really supportive of Future Partners being transparent on, please don't use Datafy for that question. Datafy can be really valuable for answering certain things and for integrating into certain projects, but there are certain questions that we say aren't the right question for that data source. And that's one of the reasons why I love working with both of the amazingly brilliant minds on this call that I'm joined by, because we all agree that if we're letting our clients basically get oversold and misuse data, their overall respect for the work we do goes down overall. Like, research in general, if it is questioned at its core, data can't answer these questions, then we won't have jobs. Like, the whole point is that we have really great ways of creatively measuring success and answering big questions. From my experience, learning about using location data to learn about smaller, more rural destinations where there is less strong cell service, where there is gaps in coverage, we've had to be very creative with how we use the location data. We've had to draw some of the polygons a little bit bigger. We've had to be more flexible with the specific, like, questions that we're asking of the data set, be way more 30,000 foot view than super zoomed in, if you will. And I'm using that as an analogy because I don't have a better one. But the like
looking at what the data means for the destination versus the event itself, right?
Right.
Like, I think
let
there
me-
needs to, sorry, go ahead, Anna.
Go there. So one thing that David and I do have going for us, we talked about this on the pre-call, where he and I actually, when this started, when geolocation first started, he and I are actually the ones for our organizations that were looking at the records with all the columns, right? The
Like
common
in Excel.
like the granular, the ID, the
Oh
Apple
God.
ID or the Android ID, like back at the day before there were these amazing, like the platform for Datafy is so amazing, right? So like we have a very oddly granular understanding of geolocation data that you normally wouldn't find with a traditional market researcher, right? I will say that we do have that in common. But to your point is that, listen, there's really interesting things that can happen with geolocation data. To your point, and you spoke very well of it. And sometimes we see that where it's like they're just not going to be the cell phone pings there because there's just not the towers, and it's just more problematic cell phone service in that. But when we're looking at things with comparison, when we're normalizing
Yep.
things in a larger one, where we're
Yep.
looking about like, is there a larger share of people going to this part of the destination to this one? Those are very useful things for geolocation targets. Also, if you're trying to look for like in your destination with points of interest, who's going where? Like, are there natural like comminglings here that for certain people that we can do like a trek that's already been organically formed, where you can start advertising that as a destination to get people to stay that one more night, to give them
Yep.
that more content? Like, are there natural affinities in your destination, right? So I think that when you're looking at things through that, and again, just because you can draw a circle around someone and have like in 2 hours time, this is the people that get into that thing, with your sample size, you have to be very you have to be like, hey, maybe that's not the best use of this. But again, it depends on both. Towards David's point, I would say not only like where your polygon is, but the amount of time you're allowing people to go into that polygon and out of it. So what's the detectable time? So I can see for a special event, especially if you're at like a concert or something that's lasting an hour and a half, maybe you're not going to be on your cell phone. So maybe a certain polygon for an hour and a half, it would be more reliable to get the ticket sales from the venue.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And
Is
like
that fair?
just to I think that's totally fair. I think just taking it a step back from the super granular, because I realize that thanks to the great work that the Datafy team does, most people don't have to get that granular the way we used to. But taking it back to what we were talking about before, the real value is in seeing trends. I might not even care about the specific device count, but consistent measurements over time measured in a consistent way means I can trust growth rates more than I can trust a raw count. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Like there are so many amazingly reliable lessons we can learn, even from more limited and niche zones, places where it is impossible to collect surveys. Datafy can come in and provide data that at least illuminates some of the questions.
So let's talk about some in real life examples, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling we're going to go over on this call because we've got 3 minutes to go. And so anyone that's on here that needs to hop, you'll get a recording afterwards, right? For those of you who can join us, I think this is where it's going to start to get really interesting. Bad time management from the moderator over here. So
Gosh, Lauren.
whoever wants to yell at me, go ahead. But David, why don't you start and
Sure.
give us a couple examples, and then Anna, we'll have you give a couple too, and then we've got a couple questions already in the queue.
I'll keep my examples brief because I want to make sure that the audience walks away with the point, and which is that there is a huge value in integrating specifically location data, but big data sources with research. So my first example is in specific segmentation where surveys aren't feasible. And my example is here in using location data for an entire state. And it's to help understand the profile of people who visit attractions across a state. I do a visitor profile for a big state. I'm tasked with answering questions about people who visit over 3,000 attractions across a state. And to do that in a survey, to have individual respondents show them a list of 3,000 attractions and say, which one of these did you visit on your most recent trip, is impossible. You cannot do that in a survey. No one would answer that question, or your data quality would be crap. So this is one of those moments where location data comes in, saves the day, helps answer really complex questions. We only ask high-level questions of the set. I'm not asking Datafy why those people went to those attractions. I'm not asking them what motivated that trip. That's stuff we get from our visitor profile survey. But being able to understand where they're coming from, how long they're staying, which regions of the state they also visited after going to one of the, again, 3,000 attractions that we're tracking. That's something that big data is uniquely powerful for. And so the integration of using location data and our visitor profile survey together in this one context, hugely valuable. Second example is on volume modeling. pre-location data, before location data came into the tourism research space, we have had volume models. We have had ways in economics to estimate the number of visitors coming to a destination, whether we're talking about a city, a state, a country. We have models for this. We have now started integrating using some specific variables from location data inputs into the model, which just makes the model smarter than it was before. I am fully on board with Lauren, and she said it earlier, so I'm going to repeat it. Using location data as your people counter is a bad idea, but using location data variables as inputs into a more traditional tourism impact model is a great idea, because there are certain questions that location data is uniquely valuable in answering that is just harder to do with surveys or other secondary data sources. The last example I want to give is in data balance. We have a particular visitor profile client where we manage both in-person intercepts and online surveys. And I have always said, and will say to the end of time, that the most valuable data you can get from your visitors is talking directly to them. I think in-person intercepts is one of the most valuable pieces of data you can get, because number one, you know they were there. There is no question about whether the visitor was in your destination. There's no question about what date you talked to them on, and there's no question about the location that they were standing in when you talked to them. Hugely valuable just to have that set of data. It is really expensive. Labor costs make in-person intercepts cost prohibitive to a lot of destinations, but the point is that that data is super valuable. However, one of the inherent biases in in-person intercept is that we have to pick specific locations to have our team stand at with an iPad asking questions. And when we look at the data at the end of the year and say, what were the top attractions that visitors visited from this visitor profile, we end up seeing our survey locations be in the top of that list because we were standing there collecting people. It's an inherent bias of the methodology of that in-person intercept. And by the way, we know that there's a bias there. What do we do when we have a bias? We look to location data. We have all of the attractions in that destination polygon so that we know from the 30,000-foot view what proportion of visitation went to those different attractions. And then we balance our survey data based on that.
I think that's an awesome segue probably into the example Anna's going to give as well.
First I have a point, and I think this is true. We have a lot more things when we're both of our companies do the same thing. On that, we do the modeling for the overall visitor count. It's really nice to have geolocation data because again, overnight, I have a lot more data sources. I got tax records, I got STR, I have short-term rental data, I have all these other things that I've traditionally increasingly, again, remember the good old days, David, when all you had to do is use STR?
Oh yeah.
Days when you and I started over a decade ago, completely changed. It's completely changed since then. But when it comes to day data, there's traditionally not as much other information other than our survey, and geolocation has been very helpful in that, in looking at that as well. Again, not as a huge determinator, but as a feed of information to put into our analytical model to see where we're going with the results of our survey. And so I will say that that is definitely something we have done. Another thing that we do, again, a little bit different with David's than versus mine, is that a lot of our visitation is done from Travel USA. Travel USA has been rocking and rolling since 1990, guys, and I have a very set definition of what a traveler is. And when it comes to a day traveler, you are 50 miles from home, at least. That's it. Like, and I can't change that definition, because if I change that definition, I lose all of my year over year going back decades. Okay. So when we have a client, again, a mutual client of ours, West Virginia, we love Chelsea Ruby and her amazing team there. So basically for the state of West Virginia, a reality is that they have a lot of amazing casino product that people within 30 to 50 miles of the state border, they're coming in for day trips and very much contributing towards the tourism economy of the state. That volume is not being captured by me because my definition of a traveler is 50 plus miles, right? But what I can look at is like, if we go in there and like, okay, we know what the volume is from Datafy. We know what that volume is when we're looking at just the regular traveler definition that balances with mine. what happens if we add these 30 to 50 mile people? What share, what percentage does that increase that day visitation for each one of these regions? I can apply that share normalized number. Again, we normalize it just to make it with more like with trending in year over year kind of stuff. What share does that increase that visitation number? So we can provide an estimate to their economic impact provider and be like, hey, this is the estimate that Longwoods does have, you partnering with DataFi in order to get these casinos, these out of state visitors that are within 30 to 50 miles from their destination. And that's a way, again, to your point, even though Travel USA is a syndicated study, it's on us at Longwoods to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our clients. So if they have a different definition of what a traveler is, I got to find a way to make that work for them. And we do, because we have great partners like you all. And I will echo David's statement here is that like we've been on mutual calls with other clients with you. I have never heard anyone from DataFi misrepresent the information or be like, you know, they've always been so responsible. And there's nothing better than seeing Kelby at a conference. Like he's like the smartest, not most least intimidating person I know, right? Like I know he's way smarter than me, but he's never made me feel that a second in his life. And he has a way of explaining these things because again, too, the way that you were processing geolocation data 3 years ago is completely different how you're doing it because the way people are interacting with their phones and the apps continues to evolve, right? And DataFi stays on that. And I will give them credit for that. And that's like, you're constantly improving. And I can feel how that's probably exhausting, but it's the responsible way to do it because you're really keeping this modern. Because if you stop with the way that, again, to David's point, these full on irrational human beings that we're all trying to measure in the travel space, right? It makes sense that how they're using these devices changes. And so as that changes, like we have real trust that DataFi is keeping track of those changes and reporting that to us.
I thank you for that because it is a challenge because we don't control how people use devices. We don't control privacy change. What we have control over is responding to it responsibly. And I think that that's not always easy for the travel and tourism industry to understand. I mean, I came over here 4 years ago. I knew nothing about this, right? So like, I still have a point of view of this being confusing. And I think that's why I try to like make sense
of it. That's why we have Kelby.
That's why we do calls like today. Real quick before we finish up, because I do want, oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
I have to echo Anna and give you, and DataFi specifically, a big compliment. I started my career as a data privacy attorney, and it is very rare in the space of different data providers in our industry to find an organization that actually does take a stance of responsibility to privacy specifically. The data that we can learn about a person from just their device behavior is super valuable and super deep, but from a legal perspective is also really risky as data privacy laws change, as just the rights of people to not be tracked in certain contexts because they're political or other protected activities.
Medical, religious, all
exactly.
that stuff.
It is really nice to have a like base guarantee that we are on the same page with what we want to learn about people that is helpful for the work we do and the work our clients do, and what we don't have any business learning. I'm very proud to know. Yeah, we don't want to know.
Well, thank you, because I think that's also to balance client expectation, right? Like, of course, we all want to know how many people were at an unticketed event, right? But what that really means is enough people needed to be behaving in a way that we can responsibly collect the data to responsibly give you an estimate.
Yep.
And we would rather say, sorry, we can't do it, and be good at what we're really good at, which is the macro point of view, than not only put ourselves in a place of non-compliance, but the end client as well, right? So I think, you know, to this slide right here, focusing on a bigger footprint is really going to help you. Focusing on where we started, Anna, that KPIs that are critical to your strategy and accountability is where you should be using this, and combining it with other things to plant the big picture. That's why we kind of have this pendulum here. It's like, it started, geolocations gave this promise of it's going to solve all these things. And then it kind of went over here. Oh God, it's crazy and it doesn't work. But like, if we can kind of land in the balance of this, I think that's where particularly big data is going to help answer things in a more real-time way than the industry's ever had before, right? But we got to take that with the fact that it's just not perfect on everything. Anna, I want to give you a second to plug this because you have been the practitioner coordinator on this project for TTRA. It's an incredible resource that we just want everyone to know exists. I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, sure. So again, the whole purpose of the Travel and Tourism Research Association International is that we all can come together both on the practitioner and the academic side in order to share thoughts and to make advances for the benefit of the entire industry. This project is the result of the first TTRA think tank. It is led by Dr. Whitney Nolenberg from North Carolina State University. Everybody on this call, David and me and you and Datafy as well, we all went and spoke with Whitney at depth about how like the strengths and weaknesses of our data and what questions would be with that. And this is the first of the white papers, and more are going to come. And basically, it's talking about like how to be a data-driven organization, how we have this toolbox. Because again, research and data, we should be using those to make strategic decisions. So how do we actually pick up the right tool for the right task, right? And doing that and being like that. And we are really grateful to have a lot of partners that are completely transparent with that, including STR, Key Data. We had like 6 or 7 full partners on this, and we're grateful for them. So please take advantage of this free resource for the industry. It is not beyond a payroll. Anyone inside TTRA or not can get a hold of it. We will publish more white papers. Whitney Nolenberg is amazing. She's such a great mind, a great leader in this thought space. And we're just trying to do this collaboration. And again, too, long wasn't future partners or competitors. We work together on this. We work together on TTRA. A lot of our clients use both of our services. The point of this is that we're better together, that we're better when we're working together, and that we're partnering like this, because that's how we advance. That's how we make sure that we are keeping up with the times, just like Datafy is with how people are using their cell phones. That's how we're going to work together. So again, please take advantage of this paper. There are other TTRA think tanks that are emerging, and there's going to be a webinar in late September about that, so you can join on other ideas as well. But it's just important for us, like I said, that's why we're doing this call, David and I, with you with Datafy, is that we do truly believe in collaboration, and we think that that is the best way forward for our industry.
Awesome. All right, so we have 2 quick questions that we'll get to, and I'm going to actually start with the 2 of you. And in your opinion, this is from Ekaterina Sorakina. In your opinion, what trends will drive the future of travel research? That's the question. The second comment was, by the way, the webinar chat is disabled. I'm like, don't read that out loud, Lauren.
And you did
Lauren.
anyway. The trends that will drive the future of travel research. Well, I think if this webinar is anything to go on, one of the big trends that will define the future and drive what we do and make us all do our jobs a little bit better is working together. I think a huge trend that we're seeing, which is gaining a lot of success, and so my prediction is that it will continue to grow, is individual destinations realizing that one data source is not always the best answer to answer every question. As Anna said, if there was one data source that answered every question perfectly, we would all work for whatever that company was. There isn't. We all do things a little bit differently. We all try to answer questions from a little bit different of a perspective. And when you put those different perspectives together, it tells a better, more valuable, and more comprehensive, more defendable story. And helps make data more actionable. So that's what I think the trend for the future is going to be, is more of us working together.
Yeah. And I think the trend of the future too is like we're having these discussions, and we're having the discussions with our single points of contact within the DMOs. I think more and more this data is going to become like a vernacular throughout the organization. Because again, so much information, like compared to like 10 years ago, the strategic plans, like there's so much more action going on these strategic plans. This data and research, this can do like KPIs, right? This can actually literally tell you if you're on track for that strategic plan. So honestly, almost everyone in an organization needs to be a data person or a research person at some level. And what I'm really looking forward to is, as that research and data goes further and further into the organization, to really make sure people are meeting their needs. Because again, we're all doing this to better everybody's life in our communities. We're trying to bring in outside resources for the benefit of our communities. And the more that we have the data, and again, too, there's bias on that. But if we're having these disparate points of data, they do tend to bounce out the bias. And so we can make the really most responsible decisions that meet the specific needs of that DMO and community.
Yeah. Agree. I think it's not just dashboards and visualizations and spreadsheets and tables. It's conversation, partners that think with you, people that are willing to dig deep and validate. And I think it's also a removal of a black box, right? Like having some visibility and transparency into how you're getting to the decisions that you're making versus just, here's what it is, take it and run, right? There's one more question. It's super loaded. It's from Kim Fox, and it is, what is a usable sample size for geolocation for smaller destinations? I think the reason it's so loaded is, what's the definition of a smaller destination? How many people live in that destination? How many people are actually going through that destination? How rural is it? How many businesses are there where people are likely to use their phone? And I don't know if you guys have anything to add, but Kim, if it's a specific place, I would be happy to offline with you. I think it's just, there is no, my answer is there is no number that makes it valid or not valid. You guys might have a different opinion.
That's what we do with surveys. We
completely
look at the
agree.
population we're representing, and then we were like, oh, this is that. So you know what I mean? And so again, like people like Whitney have been establishing for us what for confidence intervals and things like that when we're using panels. It's a case by case. It's not the same answer every time. It just isn't. You have to look at what you're representing and the realities of that location, and then come up with what you feel comfortable with what's comfortable scientifically with you and your team.
And just so we're clear from like a statistical significance perspective, margin of error is not always calculated at the sample size. It's calculated at the question. Like, depending on what question you want to answer with your DataFi data, you might need a larger sample to do.
True. I agree. Yeah, he's right.
It's not just my destination is this size, so this is the amount of device traffic that, helps me know that what I'm doing is reliable. It's like, if you're just trying to figure out where they're coming from or how long they're traveling, maybe you don't need as large of a sample. If you want to know specifically how long they stayed on that particular 2-foot square, like, you need a big sample.
Yeah. Yep.
So
I think that's spot on. And, we are way over time. Thank you to everybody that stayed on. I love this conversation. I love talking about this. I think, if anyone wants to sidebar with any of us, we're always happy to chat further. Hope this was helpful and useful. The toolkit that Anna shared, I'm just going to go back to it one more time in case anyone wants to scan the QR code. This is really where the industry is going. It's collaboration. It's how to use this. It's how to be able to stand behind the decisions that you're making. We aren't the decision maker. You're the decision maker, but we want to help you be equipped to make informed decisions that you can stand behind and defend. And so, thank you, Anna. Thank you, David. You guys are a pleasure. And just happy that we all get to work together on these types of things. So I'm going to end it. Everyone will get the recording if you want to share it with any friends. And thanks again, everybody, for joining.
thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.